There's a note up here. I don't think it's for me, though. Well, good morning, and welcome on this third Sunday of Advent. Whew, getting close, isn't it? Let's maybe just a little over a week away. Christmas will be here. Advent is about coming. We remember the coming of Christ. At the same time, we're also waiting for the coming of Christ, right? The second coming of Christ, and that's what we do during this time of Advent. Well, I'm glad to be here this morning and to be able to share God's Word with you. When Pastor Dan asked me to speak, he asked me also if I would share a few thoughts about a recent mission trip that I was at in Haiti. So I want to do that. I could probably speak about an hour or keep on going on Haiti. I want to really try to keep this as short as I can. I really don't have a lot of time to tell you all that I'd like to tell you. If you want more information, I'd be glad to talk to you. There is also a Facebook page called To Haiti with Love, and you could go there and see more pictures and get more information. But let me just share a little bit about this. In September of 2014, my very, 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 very good friend, Pastor Larry Mancini, he had a Haitian man who was attending his church, and that man asked him if he would come along with him to Haiti on a trip. He was going to see his brother, and he asked Pastor Larry to come along. His brother was overseeing a school there that was being sponsored by a couple of Roman Catholic churches, pretty big school, and the school and this man's house was on this large compound. And in comparison to how the rest of the community lives, this man was in a mansion. It looked like a mansion that he was in. And while he was there, this brother told Larry that there was a pastor in the village that wanted to meet him. And Larry said, well, sure. Before he had an opportunity to meet that pastor, he went for a walk. And you know that there was an earthquake there in 2010, I believe it was. And there was a building that was pretty much destroyed. And someone said to Larry, I think that's the building of the pastor who wants to meet you. And Larry said, that's impossible. How could that possibly be a church that someone is using? Let me put up that slide. You'll see how the church looked at that time. And the man standing in the front of that building is the pastor of that church. So there's no roof. There's no walls. I don't know if you could tell, but on the left-hand side there is a wall, but it was very wobbly. Like if you touched it, it kind of wobbled. On the right-hand side there's some cinder blocks just to help keep people from going off the side. That church was up on a hill, and when the earthquake came, the whole side of that hill that the church is on just collapsed, right up to and including that wall on the right side that you're looking at. So Larry's thinking, how could this possibly be? He had to climb over some rocks to actually get into the building. But sure enough, there was 30, maybe 35 faithful people that were walking in the hot sun every Sunday, sometimes for a mile or more, to come and worship in that building. And Larry went to the service that Sunday. By the end of that service, he knew that God was calling him to rebuild the church. He comes from he passes a small church on Long Island in New York. He has no funds. He didn't know how he was going to do that. He only knew that that's what God was telling him to do. The first thing that had to be done was we had to build a wall, a retaining wall on the side of that hill that collapsed. So we had to build a wall there, and we see the people working on the wall. And whenever we worked, we hired some people, if we could, to help them out. But people from the community would come and help us as well. And so that was the first thing we did. We had to reinforce the foundation, and we had to build that wall, that retaining wall. As we started to build on the church, and as Larry started to get to know the people there and in the neighborhood and saw the needs, we started to add to the building. And so the first thing we added was a clinic. The next picture will show you a picture of the clinic. I'm the tall man on the left. No, I'm the little guy on the right. That's actually the taller man is my former DS. He was working in the clinic before me. I think he left the day after this picture was taken. So I was kind of doing on-the-job training with him to be the clinic. No, it doesn't look much like a clinic, but behind that white curtain is the actual clinic. I'm in the waiting area. And the next slide, you'll see the people waiting outside, some of the people waiting outside to come into the clinic. We saw over 325 people while I was there. I was probably included in that 325 a couple of times, but we saw 325 people at least. And I could tell you two things for sure because I was there. 3 people lives were saved because of that clinic. 3 people would have died if we had not been there. The other thing I could tell you is that 3 people came to the Lord through our nurses in that clinic while I was there. And so God is working in some, God is working in incredible ways there and in that place. The other thing we did, you'll see in the next slide, is that children were hanging around like all day long in the neighborhood. And someone said, why aren't these kids in school? And they said, well, there's no public school for the children up here in the mountains. We were in the mountains in the southern part of Haiti, about 4,200 feet up dirt, rocky roads, and that's where we were. And we said, as a matter of fact, they said the government actually encourages churches to start schools. How about that? And so that's what we did. The only thing is, the people in that area can't afford to go to a private school. The amount of people who are working in Haiti, this is unbelievable, but this is what I was told, is 6%. Only 6% are employed, and most of them probably work at the airport. So we started a sponsorship program. For $35 a month, the children can get an education. They get a uniform. I don't know, you can tell from that picture, you see like a yellow and a light blue. That girl there is wearing like a light blue skirt and a yellow top, and that's the uniform that we give out to the kids. And they also get one hot meal, which for most of these kids is the only hot meal that they get during the day. You see, is that much of a school as you would think? They sit on these benches, no desks. They have those wooden things that's in the front there. That's their blackboard. We paint it with a blackboard paint, and that's their blackboard. The next slide, you'll see the church as it looks now. We will be getting a roof on that church soon. I think the funds have come in, or they're coming in. We don't know where the funds, Pastor Larry would tell his story. He would never ask for money. He would just say, pray, and the funds are coming in. And that piece of property back of the church where the mountain had collapsed during the earthquake, we were recently able to purchase that property. And Lord willing, we're hoping to put up another building for an orphanage. There's about 45 orphans in the village there that we know of, and so that's the plan that we hope to do. One other thing I wanted to talk to you was about the well. We are working on putting a well in. The well would be near the church. This is the spring. I don't know what I expected to see when they took me to the spring, but this was a cement wall with a pipe coming out and water coming out of that pipe. That was the spring. People travel about a half a mile down a steep, very narrow path to this area. They fill up these 5-gallon buckets with water that probably weigh about, 45 pounds after they're filled up. They put that 45 pounds of water on their head and they walk back up this steep hill, and that's how they get their water. I don't know, they do it in ripped up flip-flops. I was in my brand new Timberland Dick's hiking boots and I fell, but they seem to be able to do that. So if we could get this well in, it'll be up on the top of the hill, closer to where some people live, and it'll be a great help for them. So we're working on that as well. But God is working in a tremendous way there in the mountains of Haiti, in this town called Bellevue. And the last Sunday that we were there, that church has now grown to, there was over 145 people in the service on this last Sunday that we were there. So it's amazing what God is doing. So, yeah. And that's really the main thing, is that, the church is getting built and all these things are happening, but what God is doing in the lives of the people there is incredible. And I wish I could share some of the stories of how people are coming to the Lord there. I want to share one, and it's going to be really brief, but I'll share this one story. The kids are hanging out at the church all the time. Even after school, they come back and hang out there, and usually looking for food and that kind of thing. So we decided that we would start to bring down peanut butter and jelly. We'd make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and give them out to the kids. They're always hungry. So I don't know when this first happened, but Pastor Larry is there giving out these sandwiches, and the next slide, I think, is a picture of James Lee. I don't know if you can see him. He's in the bottom left corner there. James Lee took the sandwich and he put it inside his shirt. All the other kids were eating the sandwich. James Lee put his inside the shirt. So Pastor Larry followed James Lee and found that he took the sandwich out, gave it to his mom, and his mom divided it up between James Lee and his 3 younger siblings. Turns out that James Lee's mother is a widow. Her name is Miriam. She's a widow. And when Larry found this out, he went back and got some more supplies. He came back and gave her some food and some other supplies and some other things. She was so thankful, hugging everybody and crying. And not right away, but somewhere along the line, Pastor Larry wanted to invite her to church. And we had one of our nurses could speak French Creole, which is the language there. And so she spoke to her and then prayed with her. And she accepted Christ. And she said to Pastor Larry, she'll be in church this Sunday. She just prayed to accept the Lord. And she's been in church ever since. Now this structure that you see in back of James Lee, that is where they were living. Now I know you see another building there that it's built up against. That other cinder block building behind them is not part of her house. Just that little structure in the front with the sheets in front of it, that no door. They just had sheets and a curtain. And that's where this widow was living with her 4 sons, all younger than James Lee. Someone from the United States heard the story and gave the funds to build the widow a house. And when we got there in October, the house was built. You're really hard to see. That's Pastor Larry on the left with the widow. And she picked out the colors. The next picture you'll see, we painted it while we were there. Painted the indoors white and the outdoors she wanted this beige color. And you see people from the community came and watched as well. And that other building in the back there, you see some... actually, it might be even behind that. They put in also a bathroom there for the community. So it's kind of a community bathroom, and that's what the widow asked us. It would help her community, so we did that as well. But here's what I wanted to say about all of that. I had asked Pastor Larry a while ago, I said, why do you think, you could go past the slides, why do you think God is working in such a powerful way, in ways that we don't see Him work here in the United States? I mean, it's amazing what's happening there in those mountains of Bellevue in Haiti. And he said, I don't know. I can't answer that question. But I think I put my finger on what I think is at least part of the reason why God is working the way He is there. At some point, Pastor Larry knew they had to move out of that mansion that was up on a hill looking down in Bellevue, and he moved into the community of Bellevue. He moved into the neighborhood. And he lived among the people. And when you go there for a mission trip, you're living with the people, with no running water, no electric, eating what they eat. It is hard. It's difficult. But Larry wanted them to know that it wasn't going to be a one-time shot. It wasn't going to come, be gone, never see him again. He goes there maybe 3 times a year or so, and he's gotten to know the people. The people have gotten to know him. We've been there for 4 years. The children now, they know, they've grown up with us, these children. And the people, they trust us. They know that we're there because we love them, and more importantly, they know that we're there because we love Jesus and because Jesus loves them. And I think because we didn't separate ourselves from the culture and the community, but integrated with the culture, I think that is the reason why we're seeing such great things happening there in Haiti. And that's really what I wanted to talk to you about this morning. And we're going to look at John chapter 1 again. John chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 1 through 5, and then I'm going to read verse 14. And this is from the New Living Translation, so it's going to be a little bit different than what you've heard. But here's what John writes. In the beginning, the Word already existed. He was with God, and He was God. He was in the beginning with God. He created everything there is. Nothing exists that He didn't make. Life itself was in Him, and this life gives light to everyone. The light shines through the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. So the Word became human and lived here on earth among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen His glory, the glory of the only Son of the Father. Who is Jesus to you? Jesus is so many things to us, but do you ever think of Jesus as being a good neighbor? I want to read verse 14 from the Message. I don't know if you ever read from the Message, written by Eugene Peterson with some other scholars that helped him. But Eugene Peterson just passed away recently. He was a pastor and an author, very good author. And here's how he translated John chapter 1, verse 14. He said, "The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood." John was a disciple of Jesus. Jesus chose him to be one of His apostles. So John spent time with Jesus, a lot of time with Jesus. John was with Him. He heard Him. He saw Him. He touched Him. He was touched by Jesus. He saw Jesus doing the miracles. He was there when Jesus interacted with people from the culture. He was there for the dying and the rising of Jesus. He had time to ponder these things. And after that, he came to some conclusions, and he shares them as an eyewitness, as someone who met Jesus, was there with Him as an eyewitness. And he shares some thoughts about who he says Jesus is. And the first thing that he says about Jesus is that Jesus is the Word. It's kind of strange, I thought. Jesus is the Word. Now, you know that the Christian Bible, also known as the New Testament, the Christian Bible was originally written in the Greek language. The Greek word that's translated here into our English word is logos. Logos. That's the Greek word. It sounds a lot like our word logo, doesn't it? What is a logo? Well, a logo is an image that a company designs so that people will readily recognize them, who they are, and what they do. And so, if you will, Jesus is the logo of God, who shows us who God is and what He does. A logo is an image. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And by Him we recognize God. Now, John didn't explain why he used the word logos, but he didn't have to explain that to the first people who will be reading what John was writing. In the Greek language, that word logos could be translated either word, or wisdom, or reason. In other words, their word logos was both the outward expression, the words that expresses a thought, and it's the thought itself. Follow me here, because this is like pretty crazy. It had to be shocking. What John was saying about this word logos had to be shocking to the first hearers, the Greeks, the Greek-minded people reading this. It's the word, and it's also the thought behind the word. In Greek philosophy and theology, the creation was a rational event. And this word, logos, was used to denote the rational and the wisdom and the thought behind the creation of the world and of the universe and of the sustaining of the universe. And so what they were hearing John saying is that wisdom was personified. That this reason and thought was embodied in Jesus. John is obviously pointing to creation. He's pointing back to Genesis. The words are almost the same. We see there in Genesis that creation came about by the spoken word, right? And the terminology is almost the same in Genesis and in John. In Genesis it says, in the beginning, God. John writes, in the beginning, the Word. In Genesis it says, God spoke, God said, let it be, and it was. And John writes, through the Word, all things were made. The wisdom of God became human. The Word of God became human. The Creator became human. The Sustainer became human. The Way became human. The Truth became human. The Life became human. The Light became human. The love of God became human. The nature of God became human. The glory of God became human. The Almighty, the Supreme Being, the Spirit became human. The glory of God, the Son of God, God became human. I think that at Christmas time, this is just my opinion, but I think that at Christmas time we celebrate the greatest miracle ever. That God became human. I know that you know this. I know that you've heard this. But when was the last time you really reflected on this? God became human. What kind of God, what kind of person does something like that? The answer can only be love. Because we know that He came to die. And His motive had to be love. And so the invisible God becomes visible, and that is who Jesus is. There was a man who, for him, Christmas was all kind of like, bah humbug. Couldn't really see why God would become man. Didn't make any sense to him. And so at Christmas, he really didn't celebrate. And on Christmas Eve, when his wife and his children would go to the Christmas Eve service, he would stay home. And he was home on this Christmas Eve in his den with the lights on, and it started to snow outside. And he thought, well, if we have to have Christmas, it's nice to have a white one. And that snow became harder and harder. It started to become like a storm outside. And soon he heard a thump on his window, and then another, and then another. And he went and looked. And some birds that got caught up in the storm, and they saw the light of his den, and they went to go towards that light. They banged up against the window and fell down in the snow. And so all these birds, I don't know how many there were some few birds that were huddled up together. They were okay, but they were in the snow. He put on some of his winter gear and he went out. And he tried to get the birds to fly. They wouldn't fly. He didn't know what to do. So he took some bread and he made a path because he thought of his barn. And so he put some bread from the birds to the barn. He opened the doors of the barn. He put a lantern in there. And he thought, well, maybe they'll go into the barn. They'll be safer in there so they don't freeze to death. They wouldn't move. So he went out to where the birds were, and he started to, try to get them, shoo them into the barn. They wouldn't move, and he thought to himself, they see me as a big and fearful character. If I could only be a bird for a few moments, I could tell them how to get saved. Just then the bells of the church rang, marking the midnight hour and the beginning of Christmas. And that's when it hit him. He got it. He fell on his knees and he said, "Now I believe, Jesus. I know why you had to do it." Jesus was fully God, and he was fully human. Someone one time compared it to being a human in a dog's body. Imagine if you, as a human being, you know you're human, you could think like a human, and yet you find yourself in the body of a dog, living like a dog among other dogs. Maybe not a great illustration, but this is how this person compared it. Think about that. And so here he is, this incarnation. Jesus is the incarnation of the divine and the human. In Jesus and his character, he is both divine and human. It's the integration of the divine and human. Yet where is he born? Is he born in a temple in the Holy of Holies where holy men could go once a year and do holy things? Does he come to a palace where a king separates himself from the culture and lives in a palace? No, he comes to be born in a barn, in a stable. And they laid him in a manger. Doesn't that sound beautiful? And they laid him in a manger. You know what a manger is? It's what the animals eat out of. That's what a manger is. That's where Mary had to place her newborn infant. We look at these Christmas cards or nativity scenes. It looks so wonderful, doesn't it? The nativity scene in a barn. You ever been in a barn? Come on, we're from North Carolina. We've all seen barns. We probably have been in a few. I've even been in a few barns and stables. They stink. They stink bad. They're dirty. They're cold. They're dark. And at Jesus' times, there's some proof that many of these stables were in caves, damp. And yet this is where Jesus comes, to this unsanitary place. I love the story of a grade school. They were going to have a Christmas play, and the Christmas play would involve Mary and Joseph going to the inn. And there was a little boy in the class that he wanted to be Joseph so bad. But when they gave out the parts for the play, his greatest rival in the class was given the part of Joseph, and he was given the part of the innkeeper. And he was furious. And every practice, he was planning on what he could do to mess up his rival on the night of the play. Finally, the night of the play comes, and Mary and Joseph come walking across the stage, and they knock on the inn door. And the innkeeper opens the door and pretty gruffly says, "What do you want?" And Joseph says, "Well, my wife and I need a place to stay for the night." And the innkeeper says, "Oh, great." He flings open the door. He says, "Come on in. You can have the best room in the house." Poor little Joseph, he didn't know what to do. The audience gasped. And there was that uncomfortable silence for a little bit. And then, thinking quick on his feet, Joseph looks into the inn. He looks past the innkeeper. He looks to the right of the inn. He looks to the left of the inn, and he says, "No wife of mine is going to stay in a dump like this. Come on, Mary, to the barn." And the play got back on course. Do you know that God still comes to dirty, stinky, dark, cold places? I know, because he came into my heart. And so not only is this integration of the divine and the human within Jesus in the incarnation, this integration of the divine and human is in us. The divine spirit is one with our human spirit. And when we open up our hearts to Jesus, when we open up our barn to Jesus, He becomes one with us. There's this integration, divine and human. Now, when Jesus was here, this integration extended to the culture. Jesus integrated with the culture. He didn't separate Himself from the culture. He integrated with the culture. He moved into the neighborhood. Didn't stay away, but it moved in. He hung out with ordinary people. He hung out with tax collectors and sinners. I know Pastor Dan talked about tax collectors, I think, a few weeks ago. Tax collectors were so hated, so despised, that they had their own category. They weren't just bunched in with the rest of the sinners. There was the tax collectors and the sinners. Yet Jesus goes to their parties. Jesus goes to the outcast. He goes to the hurting. He goes to people that other people wouldn't go to. Jesus didn't build a building and say, okay, once a week you could come here and I'll be here and I'll speak and I'll answer your questions and you can meet me. He didn't say, we're going to throw a big event. Didn't say to His apostles, let's throw a big event, we'll put up a tent, we'll sell some tickets, we'll have everybody come and I'll speak. Jesus wasn't about big events. Jesus was about relationships. He integrated. He went to the culture. He came and lived for a while among us. He moved into the neighborhood. You know, we're always dealing with extremes. It's so hard to have balance in our life, isn't it? You ever try to walk on a balance beam? You usually go off to one side or to the other. And so we deal with these extremes too. And when it comes to our culture as Christians, we usually fall on the side of fighting against the culture and cursing the darkness rather than bringing a light to it. Or we succumb to the culture and we become like them. But there's another option. And the option is to maintain our uniqueness as Christians and countercultural, and at the same time loving our culture and serving our culture and bringing a light to our culture. John says that, in the New Living Translation, I like what John says there about light. He says that light can extinguish darkness, but darkness cannot extinguish light. When I was in Haiti, we stayed in what they called the man's cave. I thought, oh boy, this is going to be good. It was a cave that we stayed in. And it was cold, and it was dark, and it was, it was a cave. And there's no electricity there, so at night when it got dark, But I had one of these little, lantern type things. You could pull it out and had LED lights in there and it would brighten up. When you go into a place that's dark and you bring either a candle or a flashlight or whatever you have, you extinguish the darkness. There's just light there. And you can't add any amount of darkness that can extinguish that light. The light extinguishes the darkness. That's why God says through Isaiah, He says, my words, and John says the word is light, right? Isaiah says, my words that I send out will not come back to me empty, but they'll accomplish my purposes. And so God says, Jesus is the light, and then He says, now I am in you, so now you are the light. And I want you to move into the neighborhood. We usually invite people to church, and it's okay to invite. We should invite people to church. But don't use an invitation to church as a cop-out for being the church. You know what I think people need more than a sermon? I think they need us to be a sermon. You and I to be a sermon. You feed them, Jesus said, right? You feed them. I don't think people need to hear a sermon as much as they need to see Christians living like Jesus. Here's what someone wrote. I don't have who it was. I'm not sure who it was. I don't know if they mentioned who it was. But this is what he said. My unchurched neighbors are not waiting for churches to adjust their preaching style or to adjust their music style in order to start showing up at the church. They are waiting for people to actually live and act like Jesus. So Jesus, he is the integration of the divine and the human. And then he comes to live in us so that we are the integration of the divine spirit and the human spirit. When Jesus lived among us, he integrated with his culture. Now that he is in us, he still wants to continue to integrate with the culture through us. My friend Larry saw the needs of that community, moved into the neighborhood. He saw the needs and he started to act upon those needs, and God is working in powerful ways, and people are coming to the church. Nothing's wrong with inviting people to church. Nothing's wrong with inviting people to our events, but go to their events too. Go to their parties. Jesus did. We are kingdom people. We are like Mary and Joseph. We are bringing Jesus to our culture. When Jesus came to earth, he left his place to come to our place. He moved into the neighborhood. Maybe it's time that we follow him and did the same. Let's pray together. As you know, there's always a place up here to come and pray. If you want to come up here and pray, you can pray where you are, pray here. As we pray this morning, maybe there was someone who came to your mind today that you can minister to. Maybe there's some thing that needs to be done where you live. When we move in with the culture, it's in their. Our culture is in our homes. It's in our jobs. It's in the places we play. And maybe there's something that you see that needs to be done. Maybe you see a mission project in your neighborhood, and so maybe you could pray about that. Ask the Lord what He would have you to do, who He would have you to go to. Lord Jesus, we are here this morning to worship you, for you alone are God, who came to forgive us, that we might have a relationship with you forever. We worship you, Jesus, for who you are. We are grateful for what you do. I pray, Lord, that you would fill us with your presence and you would use us as your vessels to do what you did, to follow you into the neighborhood, that people might see you in us. Help us by your grace. We thank you, Lord.